Alrighty, let's jump in. We'll try to get this done for you as quickly as possible. Okay, so today, last topic, right? We're going to talk about another kind of sociologist and technology kind of thinker. This time, Sherry Turkle. I'll tell you about her a little bit in a sec. This is kind of our last unit on youth and technology, and from there, I have a couple of example questions for the final exam that we can look at really quickly, and then we are done. So I don't think we'll go the full time. I don't think we'll run right up till 4 today. And if it's going well, we'll probably just blast and not take a break and just end early. Okay, so obviously, final exam on Friday, starting at noon and then ending 2 hours later, right? So again, you can write it from anywhere. And sorry. I said the official time is noon to 2. I've opened it for the full 24-hour period, right? So you can write it anytime. Once you start, you get 2 hours. Okay, so no real problems there. I'll be here kind of ish around noon, and if nobody shows up, then I'll take off. And I'll go back to my office, and if you're looking for me, if you have questions about the exam, email me, or you can come and find me if I'm not here. So let me think. Anything else? Exam, it's just, again, it's non-cumulative, so it's just the last, from crime, youth and mental health, and then the 3 kind of youth and technology topics, and the documentary that we watched, right? So those are the kind of topic areas that are available for the exam. Same format as before, just short answer questions, and you have a good long time to do it. So I think it's pretty straightforward, and you should be pretty used to it by now, and you've done pretty well on these exams so far. So I don't really have any concerns. Any questions before I kind of jump into content about the exam or anything?
And how many questions?
It should be 6 because it's the final exam, so it's one more short answer question. That's how I set it up today anyway. Yeah, so it's 6. So basically that gives you 1 on each kind of topic, right? So 1 on crime, 1 on youth and mental health, 1 on the documentary, 1 on Postman, 1 on Twenge, and 1 on Turkle, right? So each area gets 1 question. So, all right. Any other questions before I jump in? I'm raring to go, as always. Yeah, my highly caffeinated matcha tea, and I'm ready to rock. Good. Okay, let's jump in then, and we will try to get through this as fast as possible, and then you're off and you can study or, go do whatever you want to do. Again, sorry, I should say one more thing before I jump in. If you want to take a look at either of your exams, just to, get an idea for the final, come talk to me after class, or, tomorrow. I'm not around, but I can do stuff on Google Meet or Zoom. Just kind of go over it quickly with you. It takes 5-6 minutes typically. It's not a very long process. So if you want to do that, you still have the opportunity, today and tomorrow. Friday, you're out of luck because that's the day of the exam. Okay, and I'll try to get the grades posted as quickly as possible. It's not a big class, so hopefully I can get it done in a day to 2 days. And then I'll post the grades on eClass, and I encourage you to check them, right? Make sure everything looks kind of hunky-dory and nothing looks kind of out of whack. And contact me if you think something isn't right. Usually, there might be a little bit of a delay getting the grades onto Bear Tracks, just because I have one student who, has some personal things going on, and so I'm just trying to delay as long as possible to let her write the final. It might take, I'll probably have it marked within a day or 2, but it might take a business day, right on Friday, so probably Monday or Tuesday, I would anticipate being done. And then, it might take me slightly longer than that to post on Bear Tracks, depending on what this person decides to do in terms of writing the exam or deferrals or incompletes or whatever. They still have to make a decision. So anyway, without getting into more details, if you really need it to go up on Bear Tracks like instantaneously, because I know some people are applying out, let me know and I'll see what I can do to accelerate the process. But if you don't have exigent circumstances that need the grades, I might stretch it out as long as like 10 business days after. So it might be a couple of weeks before I actually post them. But your grades will be up on eClass and you can see what you will be getting. So hopefully no panic there. Okay, try to balance everyone's needs. Alrighty, so let's jump in here. Fun times. Okay, so who is Sherry Turkle? So Sherry Turkle is an interesting kind of person. I've mentioned her a couple times in the course. She wrote really famously a book called Alone Together, about the kind of late millennial experience of starting to use social media and have it increasingly kind of impinging on everyday social interactions. So Turkle is an interesting figure, right? She has a PhD in sociology, but she ended up working in a kind of odd field, which is essentially human-computer interaction at MIT in Boston, right? The Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Definitely one of the more prestigious kind of schools. And so she's been brought in to these kinds of debates a lot because of, initially really about how computers were changing things like work, but increasingly, with the advent of social media and smartphones, how a lot of human relationships have been sort of reshaped by technology, right? By the technology particularly that we have in our pockets every day. And so she wrote this book, that I'll be talking about today, called Reclaiming Conversation, after she wrote Alone Together, as a sort of, I guess, kind of social critique of how we use technology, and particularly in her mind, especially with young people, how it's changed our relationships kind of across the board. And she has her suggestions as to what people need to do to reclaim that, but she's really concerned with this idea that technology has taken something away from us. And so in that way, I compare her in some ways to Neil Postman, right? Even though she never cites him, and I assume she's read him, but I actually don't know, because I've never seen a citation in any of her books where she cites Postman. But they're in a kind of similar vein of being concerned about, the sort of ecological changes in human kind of relationship ecologies that these technologies are bringing about. Okay, so starting off, she recognizes really powerfully that these technologies are transformative, right? And that they've changed a lot of things, potentially for good, but also for ill. And she says, kind of at the beginning of the book, that smartphones are a particularly powerful invention, but why? Because basically it gives people, what she said are three things, right? And three things that she thinks people have always in some sense wanted, right? Because of our social and relational kind of nature, but never had access to in the same way. Okay, so one, that you'll always be heard, right? That you have a venue that you can speak into where people will notice, right? You can post on social media, that you're having a bad day, or imply that you're having a bad day, and basically someone's going to see it, right? And you're hoping someone will reach out and send digital hugs or whatever people do. Okay, so that's one, right? That you don't have to, that you have a voice, right? And this is something I think that's quite powerful for human beings, that you have the ability to speak and be heard. Right? And again, this is not something that's been true of people, for all of history, right? People often felt very voiceless and powerless, like they had no venue to speak. And social media gives you a venue to speak, at least to the people you're connected with. Okay. And so, sometimes obviously it is grossly misused, right? We obviously see people who we wish weren't so public in their speech, getting a voice on social media every day. Okay, the second one, that we can put our attention wherever we want. Essentially that you never need to be bored, right? That basically, when you're in the checkout line at the grocery store, or wherever you are, right? You're waiting in line at the bank, or, your professor is prattling on in boring fashion, that you can put your attention somewhere else, right? Social media gives you the chance to shift your attention to something that interests you, right? Whether it's, news updates about the war in Ukraine or funny cat pictures, you can put your attention, or some Reddit forum, you can put your attention essentially anywhere you want, and you don't ever have to actually be bored. And that you never have to be alone is the last one, right? Loneliness, is a particularly, I think, corrosive human emotion. One that's functional in some ways, right? Because it's always kept us trying to connect to other people. But it is one that's difficult to deal with. And especially in modern societies, right? You get what Durkheim would call anomie, right? Where people feel disconnected from the social world. And in a sense, smartphones can allow you to find online community or to engage in online discussion so that you don't feel alone, right? So you kind of don't have to deal with feelings of social isolation. I don't know, Marx might call it like an opium of the people, in terms of, trying to remedy that modern plague, which is loneliness. Okay, so that's kind of, she thinks that's the three really most powerful things that this technology does. And part of what keeps us coming back to it is that we want those things, right? Now, she also says that we're suffering at the moment from a sort of technological immaturity. These technologies are relatively new, they're relatively novel. They've only really appeared since 2007, and we're still sort of figuring out the social rules of what to do with them and about them. And so, this quote from the book, that in the midst of our great experiment with technology, we're caught between what we know we should do and the urge to check our phones, right? You should be doing homework. You should be paying attention to your friends at the restaurant, playing with your children, but instead you're on your phone. And trust me, this happens all the time. One of the things that Turkle kind of pulled out of what she did a bunch of qualitative kind of interview work with young people, is that she said, and actually broadly speaking with a bunch of different kind of groups, later we'll talk about like business leaders at law firms and engineering firms and what they thought about it. But what she said, was that young people increasingly report, a lot of the same stuff that we saw in that Springtide kind of data, but interpreted a little bit differently, or stated a little bit differently, that they want authentic connections and that they're having trouble forming it because people are so distracted by their devices, right? Because people are always kind of half there, right? Their parents are half there, their friends are half there, and half on their devices. Part of this, one of the things that they sort of alluded to in the documentary, is how powerful the design of some of these devices is, right? That, the constant notifications, right? The ping, the buzz, or whatever it happens to be, is designed to constantly pull you back into the device, right? To get your eyes back on it, and show you you're missing something, right? So you should engage. And this is actually, like, I've noticed this just recently because I never go on Facebook because who cares? But for some reason, Facebook has been sending me notifications on my phone recently. It's like, oh, this person, commented on their own post. And I'm like, well, I don't care. I didn't see the post. Why would I care about the comment that they made on their own post? But it's Facebook, right? Almost like those fictional characters inside the machine from the documentary, right? Constantly trying to send, updates to try and get me looking at it. Well, Facebook has probably noticed, Jeff, you're not looking at your phone very often. You haven't checked Facebook in months. We need to draw you back into Facebook. And I'm like, it's designed this way. Very famously, a lot of tech executives, most notably like Steve Jobs, have said they would never let their children use, iPads and iPhones because they understand the engineering that goes behind it and the attention suck that happens, right? And how much it just kind of hacks your brain so that you're constantly drawn back to it all the time. Okay. Turkle also suggests that this has had a kind of deleterious effect on social relationships in a bunch of different spheres, particularly along a whole axis of communication. And this is kind of what the book is about, right? She calls it reclaiming conversation because she thinks people need to learn how to talk again. And the genesis of the book is basically she was called into a kind of posh, northeastern kind of New England prep school, right? Where, they have these in kind of prep boarding school, where basically the administrators of this school had noticed that a lot of their students were having fights and kind of, mental breakdowns that occasionally devolved into self-harm and suicidality around kind of questions of social media. And so they brought in, renowned technology expert Sherry Turkle to try and figure out what was going on. And especially they had one particular incident where one girl relentlessly bullied another girl on Facebook. At the time was the big social media platform, to the point where this other girl, basically expressed that she was thinking of killing herself. And when they brought in, the offending party, this person was having a hard time understanding the harm they'd done because they said, it's just social media. Like, what's the problem, right? It's not the real world. And the administrators, failed to kind of get through how much harm this person was doing. Now, this is consistent with a whole bunch of research that suggests that mediated interactions actually reduce your ability to read empathy, read human emotions and empathy. They've done a bunch of experiments with this over the years, right? Like, how well are teenagers able to read human emotions? So they show people, videos or pictures of people's faces and ask what's going on. And there's been a marked reduction in teenage ability to read emotions, which actually is pretty remediable. One of the things they found that a period of kind of tech-free living, so particularly when they've done experiments, they take tech away and send kids off to a summer camp. And when those people come back, they're better able to read human emotions, right? Their markers of empathy actually go up considerably. Okay, Turkle kind of focuses in on one particular, and she thinks, noxious way that human relationships have been negatively affected by these technologies. In particular, the phenomenon, she says, of young people always wanting to apologize for things, not in person and not, not in person, but instead using some kind of technological mediation, text messaging or email. And basically, what she says is, the technology has allowed people in interpersonal circumstances to step away from a lot of the uncomfortable emotions that come with social interaction, right? So when it comes to you've hurt somebody, right? You've offended somebody, and you need to make amends. What she's seen is that a lot of young people now prefer to do this, by text message or by email. Why? Because the experience of actually dealing with the person, seeing them, maybe seeing that you made them cry, that you upset them in some way, ultimately is too much, right? It's overwhelming when you haven't had to deal with a lot of those things historically, right? That it actually is kind of problematic because you're like, I don't know how to deal with these emotions. I'd rather just not face the person, but still apologize. However, what's been found in a bunch of studies is that these types of, and whether this is like with a romantic partner, a spouse, a friend, someone you're doing business with, these types of apologies are less about actually resolving the problem than just pushing the problem aside, right? And pretending to be sorry. But what ends up happening is, because you're mediating things and you're not dealing with the human emotions behind it, and not, doing the back and forth and coming to a resolution, that resolution isn't always possible, right? Sometimes things just get swept under the rug and they kind of fester and stay under the surface unless they're dealt with in person. So, and this is kind of the theme of the book, right? It's like, we need to learn how to do the things conversationally and in relationship that we used to do, because the way we're doing it through technology simply isn't working. Okay. So, she suggests a kind of model, basically how she thinks we need to think about rebuilding our ability to have conversations. And she takes it kind of a metaphor from a book. a book called Walden by Henry David Thoreau. It's a very famous kind of American book where Thoreau sort of, went off to live in the woods by himself. How does he put, I'm trying to remember the line from the beginning of the book. It's been a long time since I read it. Something to the effect of, I went to the woods because I wanted to learn to live deliberately, to suck out all the marrow of life. He goes on, I can't remember. I used to know the whole beginning passage of it, and I'm disappointed with myself. I could do some Shakespeare for you if you prefer, or maybe not. Okay. I still, I think, remember most of the to be or not to be soliloquy from Hamlet from when I was in high school and had to memorize it. So that's a super useful skill. Okay, so she suggests this model from Walden, right? Where basically, Thoreau starts out with just one chair in his house, and then sort of as he realizes he needs other human beings, he adds more chairs, right? So the first chair is kind of solitude and you by yourself. 2 chairs is kind of friendship and close relationships. And then for Turkle, the third chair is kind of the broader world, right? Work, education, and sort of civil society. Okay, so the first one she focuses on and where she thinks the technology has actually robbed us of something essential that we need to rebuild, and especially for young people, is the self, right? And particularly what she suggests is that because you have that ability now to never be alone, in a lot of cases, people are never alone, right? They never have what you might think of as solitude, because there's constantly a stream of things that could be coming in, right? With your smartphone, you could text someone, you could FaceTime them, you could listen to a podcast, you could watch a YouTube video, right? You could be doing a million things all at the same time. So she says one of the things that these technologies have taken from us is a sense of solitude and time by yourself, which she suggests, and this is pretty well known in psychology, solitude and particularly self-reflection are critical to proper human development, right? Because that's where your sense of who you are, the self, right, is actually shaped. It's what allows you, forming a proper sense of the self, who you are, what your goals are, how those goals are different from other people, what your values are, what your beliefs are. In general terms, right, it was what allows you to become a functional person, right? To gain self-reliance and to be able to build empathy, right? To treat the other as someone else, as an other, but to empathize with them because you understand what's going on well within yourself at the same time, right? So yeah, she says if you're comfortable with yourself, you can put yourself in the place of the other. Now, one of the really critical things that she suggests, and this is kind of in psychology, and she's taking a lot from psychology here. It's not so much sociology. One of the things that people need to do, especially as they move into adulthood, right? As they go from childhood, where your sense of self is really tied to your parents, right? You are their child and their beliefs are kind of your beliefs. You enter adolescence, you start to detach from your parents, right? You start to form your own beliefs, your own kind of story of yourself. And then as you enter emerging adulthood, right, you separate further from your parents and then really establish who you're going to be in the long term. Now, what she suggests is that one of the things that is needed for this is a stable autobiographical past, right? Basically, one of the things that we do to figure out who we are is think about the story of our life, right? And we do this in not so much like, long narratives, but in bits and pieces, and we kind of cobble this sense of who we are together based on how we understand our past. And this is a much more malleable process than you might imagine it to be, right? Because human memory is inherently shapeable and reshapable, right? You can actually reshape your own memories relatively easily, and you do it all the time. And so, we're constantly kind of telling and retelling the story of who we are, right, as we think about who we are and what our values are. And having a kind of stable sense of who you are, right, where you came from, what your values are, is essential to facing the world in a confident way, right? It's sometimes referred to as ontological security, right? A knowledge of who you are that's stable, right? Ontology is the study of being. It's a security in your own being, right? And it's necessary to be emotionally fulfilled, to be kind of confident in the world. And I mean, one of the ways we know that this is very, this kind of sense of who you are is less stable than you might want it to be, is that when people encounter like a crisis, people will then often rewrite their own biography, right? And you see this, when people say who convert to particular religions, right? They will kind of retell the story of their life with the culmination of it being that conversion to Christianity, right? Being born again, or to Islam, or whatever it happens to be, right? They rewrite the past so it fits a kind of narrative. And often, say if you take evangelical Christians, it fits a certain kind of form of story. Anyway, I could get into this all day because I think it's really interesting. If a spouse dies, or an intimate partner dies, close friends die, people will often then kind of turn inward and rewrite this story as well. It's something that's well known and really common. Okay, so why is this important? Well, because you can't really face the world unless you do this, right? Because you don't have that security and that sense of confidence in knowing who you are, and you're more easily manipulated by outside forces if you're not firm and stable in your own values. And she thinks, right, that solitude and thinking about yourself is a conversation, but it's a conversation with you about you, right? With yourself about yourself. Now, what she says is, this is time-consuming and difficult, right? In always-on, always-connected cultures, there isn't as much time to find that kind of solitude, right? To find that space where the self can ultimately be formed. Okay. And yeah, self-reflection is actually critical to human flourishing, right? It gives you a greater insight into yourself, right? It gives you time to converse with yourself about what you want, who you are, how you relate to the world, and all sorts of things like that. And it's something that actually human beings in the past have formed a lot of different, have created a lot of different methods of self-reflection. And I mean, most spiritual traditions will have some, forms of meditation. If you look at, say, Christian traditions, right, they have, like in Roman Catholicism, you're supposed to go to confession every now and then, pretty frequently actually, and you're supposed to do an examination of conscience, right, before you go to confession. So something like this. But every spiritual tradition has some kind of form of self-reflection, whether it's like in Buddhism, trying to figure out what your attachments are, right? And then, trying to detach from the things that you're attached to. Every spiritual tradition has it. One of the more famous ones is Augustine's Confessions, right? So Augustine, back in the 400s, maybe the 500s, I can't remember now. No, it would have been the 400s. He's talking about the end of the Roman Empire. Augustine, not in that book, in a different one. But Augustine, writes this Confessions where he tells the story of his life, right? And how he came to be who he is, right? So there's a long tradition, literarily of this, like autobiography, essentially a form of this kind of self-reflection. We see this in kind of secular traditions too. Psychoanalysis and psychiatry and therapy are all forms of this type of guided self-reflection, where a trained professional kind of guides you through thinking about yourself. Now, one of the things that Turkle suggests is that one of the things that all of these ways of knowing yourself share is that they're time-consuming and they're difficult. They're often kind of painful, right? It's not always pleasant to look at yourself in the mirror. You might, this kitten sees a lion, but you might very well see something far less pleasant when you look at yourself in the mirror. Okay. Yeah, boy. Now, one of the other things that she suggests is that a lot of this has been supplanted now by, self-presentation, right? So in a sense, like all of these forms of self-reflection are also forms of self-presentation. You're presenting yourself to yourself. But what she suggests is that increasingly what social media has done is it's emphasized and encouraged self-presentation constantly to other people, right? On social media, right? Whether it be Facebook or Instagram or whatever it happens to be, right? People are constantly doing these forms of self-presentation where they're putting out an image of themselves into the world, right? So one of the things that she feels is really a problem about this is that in a sense, life is a zero-sum game. You have only so many hours in your life. You have only so many hours in the day. And so every moment that you spend on, social media, taking 50 pictures of yourself so you can find that one that looks just perfect so that you can, put a filter on it or Facetune it and put it on Instagram is, an hour or 50 minutes or whatever, how long this takes, that you didn't spend potentially doing something else, right? Doing some kind of self-reflection. So what she suggests, the other form of self-reflection that people used to do a lot and has become less and less common is diary writing. Diary and journal writing is something that people used to do a lot, and that's actually something that people don't do as much anymore. Okay, so Turkle compares, right, your presentation of yourself on social media to those older forms of self kind of reflection and presentation that happened in diaries and journals, right? Diaries and journals were for yourself, right? It was for you to write, and you could be completely open about it, right? You would hide your diary, or you would trust that the people in your life wouldn't read your journal, hopefully. My sister made that blunder several times. I will admit, I read her diary. It was shocking how boring she is. No, I'm just joking. No, it was true. Her life was very dull. It was all about boys she had crushes on and wouldn't tell in high school. It was very dull. Anyway, that used to be for yourself, right? You would think about yourself. You would write about yourself. You would tell the truth about yourself to yourself. It was a way of getting things out. Increasingly, people don't do that. Why? Turkle thinks because they're on social media, because they're presenting an image of themselves externally, right? And, this is often a sort of idealized self, right? This is not who you really are in a lot of ways, because who you really are, when you're presenting yourself to other people, you're putting out your best self. And so, one of the things we've seen all sorts of weird manifestations of this. Sometimes people who feel alienated from their social media personas because they know they're not that person, but they feel compelled to continue kind of pushing forward that image of themselves. And we've even seen kind of, I don't remember the exact clinical term for it now, but a kind of dysphoria around Instagram where people are alienated from what they look like because they want to look like the filtered images that they put on Instagram, right? And the kind of tuned up images that they see on social media that they've created themselves. And so they actually feel dissatisfied with their body because they do not look like the person that they themselves have sort of created, which is a very weird kind of body dysmorphic disorder. Okay, I know this one always kind of jumps out at me because I think about my wife's cousin. My wife has this one cousin, and if you went on just her Facebook, her life is perfect, right? It's all the posts are about how wonderful her kids are, how perfect her husband is, how he brings her flowers every week. When you actually get down and talk to her, like at a family event after she's had a couple of glasses of wine, her life is a mess. Like all of our lives are a mess, right? If you look at my life, you'd probably think, ugh. Her life is a mess, right? Her kids don't listen. They have, some learning disabilities that she's constantly stressed out about. Her husband, loves sports, so he's oftentimes inattentive during whatever sports season. I think he likes baseball, football, and hockey, so all the time, right? So he's frequently inattentive and unavailable on Sundays during football season because he has NFL center field or whatever. I don't watch football, so I don't know. A more boring game could never have been invented, in my opinion. I'd rather watch curling, which is saying something. Because I don't like curling either. Anyway, my hatred of football notwithstanding, right? Her life is actually a mess, but she has this presentation, and she seems to feel compelled to always present the good parts of her life, often with filters on the images on Facebook and Instagram, even though one suspects she knows her life isn't quite that good. Okay. Yeah, the other thing about that's increasingly true, and this is something I think the documentary mentions, and that hopefully we're all increasingly aware of, is the permanence of the sort of online space. Right, a lot of these older forms of self-presentation or self-reflection were very personal, and they could be destroyed, right? Or they were protected by some kind of professional bond, right? So like diaries, you could hide them or burn them or destroy them, right? You could shred them, get rid of them in some way. Very famously, right, Sigmund Freud didn't want his personal journals to ever be published after his death, probably because he had mommy issues. Didn't want people to find out about it. And so he actually burned his journals, prior to his death. The Russian emigre writer Viktor Nabokov, Vladimir Nabokov, didn't want the notes he wrote about his final novel to be published, so he asked his son to destroy them. His son, being a scumbag, instead had them published and made millions of dollars off of them. So that's what but they could have been destroyed. Psychiatrists, psychologists, psychotherapists all have a professional obligation to keep your notes about your sessions private, with a few caveats about whether you intend to harm other people, mostly cause yourself irreparable harm or harm other people. They can't disclose those. If we go back to kind of religious traditions, there's not as many strictures here, but if you look at Roman Catholicism, right, anything you confess to a priest in Roman Catholicism, they have to keep secret. It's called the seal of the confessional. If they break it, they automatically get excommunicated from the church. Intriguing. Very loud. Just gonna go over here. Apparently we're moving all the furniture today. Okay, so those things used to be private, but increasingly we know that a lot of the electronic stuff that you put out there is permanent, right? So I did an experiment with this. I don't know, I've been on Facebook, I've had a Facebook account probably since 2008, right? So a fair long time, almost since the platform was available. And I was like, you know what, I should go back and I should delete all those old Facebook posts, because it was a weird platform when it came out. And so I went back, way in the timeline and deleted a whole bunch of stuff. And then a couple of years later, they made it possible to download your data off Facebook. So being of a curious nature, I did that, and I downloaded my data, and I scrolled, down to the bottom. And what did I find? All of those posts that I thought were deleted are all still part of my Facebook metadata. Right? So I may have wanted to forget about that. Apparently Facebook does not want to forget about that. Those posts I made when I was like a master's student in 2008, shit talking classes I was in and this kind of, and people who were in the program with me. So apparently, Facebook never wants to forget that, and it's going to keep that in a hidden form forever, right? And you've seen lots of things, with so-called cancel culture, where people dig up 10-year-old tweets that people have put out. And that stuff never goes away. It's not easily expungible. So in a sense, this form of self-presentation can come back to bite you in pretty major ways. Okay. So that's her sense of, the self, right? Who you are as an individual person. When it comes to kind of the more kind of friends and family sphere, she suggests that these devices have invaded that space as well, right? And again, sometimes for good, sometimes for evil, or for ill. It's not always clear cut. Like she admits, that there are definitely advantages, right? For people who've moved away from home, it's much easier to stay connected with friends and family than ever used to be, right? FaceTime, Zoom, Teams, Skype, right? All give us the option to stay connected with people in really kind of broad ways that would have been unimaginable, a few decades ago. Like you had a phone, right? Video chats and constant text messages, and the degree of kind of intimate contact you can have with people is something I think that is quite good. And, again, the documentary kind of spoke to this, right? There's a lot of good parts, and that's the stuff that keeps us coming back. Now, that said, she suggests that increasingly, conversations that used to be face-to-face have migrated online, right? Even with families reporting that, well, they're all living in the same house, they're text messaging each other from separate rooms, right? Especially as adolescents get phones. I should tell you this story because it's a story about my wife and how bad of a person she is. Let's just put it this way. A couple of years ago, the school where she teaches at, they have a rule about not bringing phones out to recess. And she caught some kid, taking his phone out to recess. So she confiscated it, and she was curious because, she's nosy as to what kind of, this kid's like 9, like what kind of messages does a 9-year-old send? So she broke into his phone. He didn't have a passcode on, and looked through his text messages, which I think is a clear violation of his privacy, but whatever. I'm like, isn't that like illegal? She's like, illegal? No. Immoral? Yes. Anyway, she looked through his text messages, and what she saw was like, basically mom and kids like, Kevin, come for dinner. I'm busy playing Minecraft, right? It's dinner time. And basically kind of messaging within the home and being like, oh, you hit your sister. Why did you do that? Rather than having these kinds of conversations in person. So that's one of the kind of things that Turkle notes. The other thing she notes is that a lot of the spaces like family dinner, those kind of spaces where young people learn social interaction skills, right? Where they learn communication skills, how to mediate problems, how to get along with other people, have been invaded by these devices to their detriment, right? That basically, if parents are constantly distracted, if everyone's constantly distracted, you're not getting that primary socialization around social skills because it's constantly being interrupted by devices. The other one, and this, again, I'll tell you stories about my wife's friends because her friends are all terrible. Her cousins and her friends are all terrible. No, they're not, but this is one that I've always been a little uncomfortable with. One of the things that she notes is that increasingly there is no private space, especially for young people, where they can feel safe. So one of the things she says is it used to be, that young people could, when they got home, often, especially for adolescents, they feel like they have to be dressed nice, they have to, have their hair up and well done. And when they get home, they can kind of let your hair down, as it were, and go back to a more comfortable mode of being. But what she suggests is that this has become increasingly difficult because there's a sense that at any time you can be surveilled kind of through social media. And so I'll give you the example of one of my wife's friends. She has this continuingly bad habit. I've been talking about this for years, and it's still true, of taking pictures of her daughter in kind of compromising positions, right? Like when she was like a little kid, it was like falling asleep and drool rolling down their face. But anytime she can find an embarrassing picture she can take of her daughter, she posts it online, right? So one of the things that Turkle says she found out in interviews with young people is they feel like they can never relax, even at home, because they're afraid their parents or siblings might take pictures of them and post them on social media, and they might be embarrassed. So even the privacy of your own home is not necessarily anymore a place of comfort. And yeah, increasingly, children, even young children, are upset with how much time their parents are spending on their phones rather than with them, right? They note that, their parents seem constantly distracted. They just want to talk to their parents, right? And I mean, the title of the article that I posted on eClass is, Daddy, stop Googling, I want to talk to you. It came out of a particular memory of one of her interview subjects where they basically reported, they asked their parent a question, and their parents, like, I don't know, let's look it up. And they grabbed their phone and started checking it on Google. And the kid's like, I actually just want to have a conversation with you. Like, this was just an in to talk to you. I actually don't I don't care about the answer. And increasingly though, they're constantly in this push and pull where technology's pulling you in to find the answer. And then it's hard to get out, and having real conversations can be difficult. Okay, for friendships, right? This is also a sphere where Turkle thinks there's a bunch of problems. You know, one of the things he suggests is that young people increasingly say that they feel uncomfortable with unmediated, real-time conversations because they feel vulnerable. Because what they've gotten used to is editing everything they say, right? Sometimes running it by other people to see, and we'll talk about this when we talk about romantic relationships, to see if they've crafted the message properly. And the ability to edit yourself obviously is a powerful one, because you could always feel like you said exactly what you wanted to say. Whereas if you're talking to someone, you might blurt out something stupid that you then have to dial back. Okay, so other kind of aspects, fear of missing out. She suggests that, in kind of social life, often these technologies that we have give us too many options, right? Just too much choice, so that we can never kind of feel like we're happy where we are. And, basically what she said is, lots of the people that she talked to, the young people she talked to, basically said that when they're with their group of friends, right, they might be hanging out or at a party, they're often in contact with other friends, in other social locations, other parties, and trying to figure out where the best place to be was. So they had this fear that they were missing out on the best thing, so they couldn't be present where they were, which obviously, you're never fully present, even with your friends, right? So as the title of her book prior to this one suggests, people were alone together, right? They were alone because people weren't really paying attention. Even though they were with people they knew or groups of friends or surrounded by people, they felt kind of detached from it at the same time. Okay. The other one, technology creating an other-directed life rather than inner-directed life. This is the other-directed life has always been a thing, right? You talk about it in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s is this feeling of needing to keep up with the Joneses, right? That somehow, you saw your neighbors pulling in with a BMW, and then you felt jealous because you didn't have a BMW, and you decided you really wanted a BMW. This has always been a thing, right? We want the things other people have. I think there's a few biblical injunctions against coveting thy neighbor's possessions, specifically for this reason, right? But basically, what Turkle suggests is that this is intensified in the social media kind of era, because you're seeing other people's lives, and often their idealized presentation of their lives all the time. So you're always, sort of tempted to measure your life by an external standard. Like, you saw that girl that you went to high school with, and she's on her vacation in Mexico, and, she still looks pretty smashing in a two-piece. And you might be tempted to compare yourself to that, right? And to have this other directed life, like, I need to, keep up with Tina, though you may not have seen Tina in 20 years, right? So yeah, technology can create this other directed life, right? Where you're comparing yourself to others rather than, that self-reflective inner directed life where you're like, well, what do you want? Like, are you happy with your own life and where it's going? Yeah, and oh my God, I just had this conversation with my daughter. This last point, that young people increasingly feel uncomfortable talking on the phone. This is, something that's been coming for a long time, but text messaging with its kind of simplicity and detachment has become, it's become increasingly common for young people to say they feel uncomfortable talking on the phone. Or people who still talk on the phone for some reason do it like Kardashian style, holding it out like this so everyone can hear. It doesn't drive me crazy, it just makes me a little insane. Seriously, I was walking around the other day in the grocery store, and I swear the person had AirPods in, but was still talking on their phone like this. And I was like, I don't understand. I hear your entire conversation, but I'm not sure I want to. Anyway, I'm sure we've all done it, so I shouldn't critique too much. Yeah, my daughter wants to bike home from school, but she's not that athletic, unfortunately. And it's quite a distance. So most days that she could do it, I could pick her up, but there's one day that I can't, which is the day she wants to do it. And I'm like, okay, well, why don't you call your grandparents and see if they could spot you? And she's like having fits about the fact that she has to pick up the phone and call someone. Because she's like, it's so uncomfortable. I'm like, yeah, I know, but at some point you will have to phone someone. And yes, it will suck, but whatever. They'll probably be on hold for 90% of the time, so don't worry. Not with her grandparents. They would pick up the phone right away and be like, blah, 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 blah. They're very old and love to talk. Okay. Oh, Tinder. Okay. Romance is the other place that she feels that, in terms of kind of close relationships, technology has invaded, not necessarily for the better, right? Now, I will preface this by saying I've never used Tinder. So much of this knowledge is merely acquired by reading books. And, jokingly, I asked my wife, hey, would you mind if I set up a Tinder account just for research purposes? And she said, sure. Would you mind if I contacted a divorce lawyer just for research purposes? And that was the end of the conversation. Anyway, real conversation that I had with my wife just to see what she'd do. It's always fun. Okay, so Tinder, right? What is Tinder? Right, basically what she suggests is it's a platform to facilitate and smooth out the rough edges of meeting someone, right? To make it, what she suggests, like friction-free, right? So that you can vet potential romantic or sexual partners in a way that takes a lot of the uncomfortable parts out of it, right? Okay, so what she suggests is it's very efficient, right? Ooh, that word should remind you of Donna Freitas. It definitely should. It makes it possible to reject hundreds, maybe thousands of potential romantic partners very, very quickly, right? And they become a sort of disposable commodity, right? Again, we should hear a lot of echoes of Freitas and Mark Regnerus, who make a lot of the same points. It encourages people also to commoditize themselves and basically make themselves into product. But what she suggests is it creates sort of a problem of choice, and it makes it really, really hard for people to overlook flaws and settle down. Ooh, Mark Regnerus again. Okay, so what is the paradox of choice, right? Basically, it's a concept from psychology that says, we tend to think that we would be happiest if we had a really large number of choices, right? If we had this massive array of choices, we would be really happy because we would be able to make the best decision, right? So we think we would be happy with lots of choices. But in reality, constrained choices actually tend to make us happier than limitless or seemingly limitless choices. So basically she says that you can have sort of two types of personalities in terms of choice making. You have either maximizers, and maximizers are people who need to know they made, big letters, my emphasis, the best choice. So they feel like they have to evaluate every single option that's out there until they can limit it down to the best choice. Versus satisfiers. A satisfier is someone who, still wants to make a good choice, right? They still have standards, but basically they aren't worried as much about having limitless choices and evaluating every single possible choice. And she says that satisfiers tend to be happier people. So the really famous example of this that's been done in kind of lab psychology experiments is basically based on ice creams, right? So basically, like in the very famous, choice ice cream experiments, you have one person giving a choice of 3 ice creams, right? Vanilla, strawberry, chocolate. They're asked to pick, they pick, and then they're asked how happy they are with their choice. And generally, they'll rate it as pretty high because they know I had 3 choices, I don't like chocolate, I'm not a big fan of vanilla, so I went with strawberry, and I love strawberry ice cream, so great choice on my part. The more choices you give in terms of types of ice cream, the less happy then people get with their choice. Because I had mint chocolate chip because I wanted my ice cream to taste like toothpaste, apparently. But I also like Rocky Road. And what if I had taken Rocky Road? Well, maybe that would have been better. And the more choices you actually give people in the ice cream experiment, the less happy, to a point, right, they end up saying they are with the decision that they made, right? And so basically what Turkle suggests is that Tinder and other dating platforms, it doesn't have to just be Tinder, right? There's a million of them out there. She just takes Tinder as a particular emblem of this because it's sort of the big fish in the pond at that time, not to be confused with another dating app, Plenty of Fish. basically says it encourages people in their romantic relationships to become maximizers, right? And she says that increasingly what people report is they're less likely to tolerate kind of things that make them modestly kind of uncomfortable with the person they're dating. Now, I think, I don't know, because I'm old and not with it at all, and my daughter is constantly telling me not to use like Gen Z slang. I find like articles online that are like Gen Z slang and how to use it, and then I run it by her and watch her cringe. It's super fun. I never thought I would enjoy torturing my children, but it actually is amazing. And I think this is encapsulated by this kind of notion of the ick, right? This kind of often vague notion that something about someone, you just don't like it. It gives you the ick, and basically because you have sort of infinite choice, you then, drop the person who gives you the ick, whatever the ick is, and kind of move on to the next thing, because you have an endless panoply of choices up to a certain point. And Regnerus, I didn't tell you this story when I was talking about cheap sex, but he kind of relates a similar story about, when he was in graduate school and he'd been dating his then girlfriend, now wife, for a while. They broke up, and for whatever reason, and basically, after several days of misery, he realized that, okay, her flaws weren't so bad, and the whole thing had gotten blown out of proportion. What he suggests is, if it was today, he probably just would have picked up his phone, gone on Tinder, and started scrolling through until he found, someone else he liked, and kind of moved on. So and Turkle tells a kind of similar story in the book, basically interviewing a young woman who was talking about her Tinder use and how she finds it somewhat problematic, basically suggesting, she had been with a young gentleman, and they had a good time, and they had sex, and he had gone to the bathroom, and basically as he was going to the bathroom, she picked up her phone and started scrolling through Tinder, and she sort of realized, it's like, well, why am I doing this? Well, I just want to know what else is out there, right? Even though I had a great time with this person. So if there's fault to be found, you can easily cast someone aside because there's sort of endless choices. But satisfaction with relationships is declining significantly as we find ourselves in this world of endless choices. Rather than, like what I said when we were talking about Regnerus, your typical circle of possible mates in the past was probably somewhere around 100 or 200 people at most. Now it's, depends on how wide you set your search area, I think. Again, never use the platform. Okay. So, in terms of micromanaging messages, she says the other thing that people try to do, especially in romantic relationships, is super micromanage messages, right? And again, part of it is this very high standard for how people evaluate potential romantic partners, right? It's become a very, I guess, cutthroat in a sense, or very, people are quick to dismiss someone because there's all these choices out there. So people have become increasingly concerned with the kind of micromanaging, messages to potential romantic partners, according to her research, right? So people are worried about how soon is too soon to answer, right? You don't want to seem too desperate or thirsty. Sorry. Oh my God. I love Gen Z slang. I'm just going to have to run that one by my 13-year-old and watch her physically cringe. Oh, so much fun. Okay. How soon is too soon to answer, right? You don't want to seem too eager or whatever. You want people to think you have a life and that you're not just sitting there waiting, right? There's a perceived value apparently in disinterested kind of detachment, right? You don't want to be like too intense because people will think you're a psycho. Keeping things online, or on text, allows people to get some emotional cover if things end. It apparently doesn't hurt the same way. And basically, a couple of the things that she noted was that basically people, they are really careful with how they text, right? How early, there's very kind of specific rules, and you can find, if you go online, all sorts of articles about, how you should manage these sorts of things. But also that people were constantly editing and re-editing their texts and running them by friends to see, hey, what do you think of this? Is this, does this make me sound too desperate, or whatever it happens to be, right? That people craft just the right message because they're so worried that, if you like this person, one strike and you're out, right? You get ghosted, or the person moves on because you're too, they have so many other choices as well. Okay. Yeah, the keeping a record, and by the way, these are just random images I pulled off of Google image search. I don't know who J-Bay is, but they were having the kind of, I think I put in argument by text, and this is what I got. So this is not me. Yeah, so I mean, increasingly, basically what she said is there's more and more kind of fighting by text or relationships where a large part of the relationship is sort of played out over text messages, right? And so what she suggests, and she tells the story of a young man in the book who basically had been in a romantic relationship with a young lady, and it had gotten pretty serious. They were living together, and then, the relationship just sort of unraveled, but most of that unraveling kind of happened by text message. And so, basically, there's a couple of things that she notes from this, that a lot of what this person said was that things that he thought had been resolved long ago ended up getting brought back because she could scroll back in her phone, 6 months, and find that comment he made that made her angry, right? And so, okay, things never got left in the past. And then also, to some extent, letting go, right? That kind of healing or detachment or moving on became really difficult because you had this constant record. And so this one young person that she talked with, 3 years later, was still scrolling through these messages because this relationship had been so important to him, trying to figure out what went wrong at the end of the day, right? So you can keep track of past wrongs, you can analyze the relationship, but it's hard to get closure. And she suggests that's not really healthy, right? In the past, things, you moved on in different ways because there wasn't a constant kind of tech reminder or tech record of things you said, right? If you said something stupid to your boyfriend, girlfriend, wife, husband, whatever, right? Generally, you just said it, and then, over time you forget and you move on, and it's not a big deal. But if it's in text message form and it never really gets addressed, it can linger for a long time. Okay. All right, so that's romantic relationships. And now we're on to the final thing that she wants to talk about. So we should be done by about 2:30, which is kind of the public sphere. So a couple of things here. She's going to talk about education. She's going to talk about business, and then she's going to talk about kind of civil society. Okay, so one of the things that she suggests, especially in the sphere of education and work, is that the technologies that we have made us pretty confident in our ability to multitask, and that we want to multitask, that we want to do multiple things at once. However, lots of studies have shown that actually we are your brain is actually unable to multitask. You cannot do multiple things at once for the most part, other than tasks that have become sort of autonomic, like driving, right? But for the most part, right, you can't do two things at once. What you actually do is a series of tasks where you move quickly from one thing to the next, right? So, you kind of switch tasks really, really rapidly. Now, that said, one of the things that she does, that actually we've seen a lot of studies of, is that the more tasks you do, the worse you do each subsequent task. However, you feel better all the time, right? You get a sort of neurochemical high, kind of a big dopamine hit from this rapid movement between tasks. You feel like you're being really productive. But when they've actually, attempted to measure this, it suggests that people actually do worse and worse over time the more tasks they add. So they've done things like they've done IQ tests, right? Where basically they had, a control group do an IQ test and kind of see what their score is. And then they've had, other people do it, and they load them up with tasks, right? Varying degree of other tasks that they're supposed to do while they're attempting to do the IQ test. And basically what they found is that with every subsequent task you add, your performance on the IQ test gets worse and worse. You actually, think you're doing great, but you actually are doing worse and worse. And sometimes, in kind of the extremes, when you really load up like a whole bunch of tasks, it can be a decline of, somewhere between 10 and 15 IQ points, which is a lot, right? It doesn't sound like a lot, but it's actually quite a bit. And then there's a whole bunch of kind of long-term effects, right? So in the moment, you're doing worse and worse. You're actually doing each task worse. Multitaskers, right, tend to have trouble, people who frequently multitask start to have trouble deciding how to organize their time. And, to some extent, right, they forget how to read human emotions. People who multitask frequently, you're also kicking up your stress hormones a lot when you do this, things like cortisol, and you actually kind of lower your natural kind of ability to be empathetic and to read other people. But she suggests, the technologies we have sort of force us to be multitasking all the time, right? When your phone sends you a notification and you feel like you have to check it, immediately you're in the realm of multitasking. Okay, she categorizes kind of the old world, and I mean, you can still get there if you want, but where we came from as a world of deep attention, right, where people tended to pay attention, to one task for a really long period of time, right? Whether it was reading, right, or doing, a specific kind of piece of work, right? People had a pretty high tolerance in the past for long focus, right? Increasingly, though, she says technology is shifting us to a world of hyper-attention, right? Where you're switching focus rapidly among different tasks. You like multiple streams of information, right? This is, I think I complained about it last class. My 10-year-old son will be playing games on his phone, which he lost on the bus yesterday, which I hope he's not supposed to bring his phone on the bus, and I hope it's gone forever to teach him a lesson. Playing games and watching TV at the same time, right? Lots of streams of information, lots coming. And in some ways, right, this is almost closer to our evolutionary default, right? When we were out in nature, right? Hunter-gatherers, living primarily in tribal units, you were constantly kind of aware of what was going on in your surroundings because there were a lot of things that could kill you. Snakes, tigers, lions, bears, deer. You don't want to mess with deer, they can get vicious. It's not all Bambi all the time. But basically, right, lots of things would try to kill you. And so you were kind of wired to be, looking around, keeping your head on a swivel, paying attention to a lot of things at the same time. And so increasingly, it seems like we're moving back, towards that default of our brain to be switching tasks all the time because in a lot of ways, the modern world and its need for deep focus is a little bit unnatural, right? So yeah, in Postman's terms, print and the world of the printed word gave us deep attention, right? Where you sit all night and pore through the latest novel that you wanted to read. But new technology is restoring us to that evolutionary default of moving from thing to thing very quickly. Okay. All right. Okay. So she suggests that this, kind of changes the way that people are learning, right, and being educated. It used to be, right, deep attention tended to move you in like the direction of doing kind of careful, in-depth research on things. But increasingly, right, what people are doing is gathering little bits of information here and there and kind of putting it together, often out of context. Something that you might call Twitter, if you were thinking about it. Like literally, I think Twitter was basically set up on this model of presenting you tiny bites of information completely out of context, right? It used to be 140 characters. I think now, if you pay Elon Musk money, you can write as many characters as you want. But right, it basically, we've moved to that world of little bits of information and I think Twitter is sort of the culmination of that. The internet, in some ways, she suggests, has made memory and thinking more optional. She hadn't encountered ChatGPT yet. Sorry, had some experiences with ChatGPT, where I will say this of people who use ChatGPT for classes like this one. Some people are really good. They paraphrase really well, and it's hard to tell. Other people, not so much. And then often, obviously, haven't come to class because it's presenting information that's way too good and that I didn't talk about. So always be careful using ChatGPT, especially if you have not gone to class, because you might not know the context that the professor is talking about. Anyway. The internet makes thinking a little bit optional, right? You can easily look up information really, really quickly. You can use a tool now like ChatGPT to try and do some of the thinking for you. or some of the memorization. So, I mean, I don't know if this is related, and I don't want to over kind of hype it. For the first time in basically since we've been keeping measures, the IQs of the United States, Sweden, and France have all declined, right? So average IQ has actually declined. And a lot of people like Turkle are putting this to, well, yeah, the internet has made so many things in terms of thinking and reasoning optional that people aren't exercising those muscles anymore. Again, I don't want to overplay that because I think that's too strong a conclusion. That's drawing far more causation than I think is warranted. And as a sociologist, I have to give you the disclaimer that correlation doesn't equal causation. But you know, there might be something to that sort of thesis. Even in terms of education, right? It's changed the way we present information. It used to be that, you know, I would come and have notes and present them. And then students would have to sort of write things out. Maybe I'd write a few key points on the board or on the, okay, this is how old I am. No, this teacher was very kind of retrograde in the way he did things, but we still had the overhead projector where he would roll the plastic and then write and then roll it some more so he could write some more, which is a very interesting way of doing it. That was only one class though. But yeah, PowerPoint is great at presenting kind of bullet point information, but it does tend to shape the way people think, right? It's like you pay attention only to what's on the PowerPoint and often less to what the instructor is saying, right? And it makes learning a very passive thing of just, you know, turning people into stenographers and trying to fill in little details around things that are on the board. Now, Turkle is of the opinion that, you know, we sort of adopted this model from kind of the 19th century University of Berlin, you know, pioneered by guys like Friedrich Schleiermacher, of me standing in front of the room, just like we're doing right now, and sort of yelling information at you, you memorizing it, and you telling it back to me on the exam. But this historically has not been how education was done. It used to be much more dialogical, right? Where I would, you know, present you some information, and then we would have a dialogue about it. You would ask me questions, and I would answer them. Or, you know, if you want to take like Thomas Aquinas, the 14th century philosopher, right? He would present an idea to his students. They would ask him a bunch of questions, which he would write down, go think about them for a week or so, and then come back and answer those questions, at which point they would ask him more questions, which he would then answer, right? So, you know, this is the kind of model of kind of more conversation that Turkle and lots of others have argued we need to get back to, away from this like information delivery model, which is increasingly probably less useful as every bit of information, you know, is contained in this tiny black rectangle. All right. How are we doing? Not too bad. I just want to see how many slides I have. Okay, a few left. Not too bad. Okay. I promise we'll get you out of here by 3 for sure. 3, including me looking over a couple of quick questions. Okay, so work. What Turkle notes is that one of the things she did was that she went to a bunch of like high-end law firms and engineering firms in Boston and New York and sort of asked them about the young people that were coming into the workforce. And they expressed a lot of disaffection with them. In a lot of cases, comparing them to pilots, right? You know, with lots of screens in front of them and big headphones to block out all the noise. And complaining that, you know, a lot of the things that used to happen in the workplace very naturally in terms of collaboration have become very labored and difficult when you're constantly having to break into someone's stream of information. So yeah, I mean, basically lots of young people now are kind of pilot-like, right? They're isolated from each other and they're less comfortable in collaborative kind of spaces, you know, especially in things like the law and engineering, where a lot of collaboration and kind of sharing of thought goes into it, right? So like the law used to be this field very much where, you know, a bunch of people sitting around in a conference room reading case law that has to do with a specific case and kind of bouncing ideas off of each other was something that happened a lot. And she suggests that, yeah, young people were increasingly uncomfortable with those kinds of conversations. Clients and service providers had suffered, and this was a problem because those relationships are important to those kinds of businesses. Okay, meetings, and I will 100% say this, and this has gotten so much worse in the era of online meetings. Yeah, increasingly meetings are a little bit pointless. People are doing a million things, right? While they're in meetings, they're multitasking, they're emailing, they're watching videos, they're, playing games, all sorts of things. So meetings, which used to be, again, spaces of collaboration and discussion, increasingly, has changed to just like communicate information, pass on information, move on to the next thing. So, increasingly, what she suggests is meetings, everything is encouraged in brevity and simplicity. Why? Because people can't handle anything more when they're taking in 18 streams of data, which makes meetings difficult and it makes it hard to get collaboration. You've had things pop up in industry, where they've had, boxes at the door where everybody dumps their phones on the way in so that you can actually have discussions. Famously, Jeff Bezos, right, the head of Amazon, made sure that people left their phones not just in the box, but in their offices, and didn't allow PowerPoints in his meetings. One very famous story, someone had a big screen TV installed in one of the boardrooms at Amazon so that they could put up PowerPoint presentations. Bezos didn't like that because he felt that that's a stupid way to present information. So he had that person fired because he's Jeff Bezos. And he had the television taken down, but he left the brackets on the wall as a legacy so people would remember, A, don't do that, B, write it in the memo, and C, if you ever try to show me a PowerPoint presentation again, you will get fired, right? So there's been a lot of kind of push in industry to get back to meetings that mean something, but it's really difficult. They've tried standing all sorts of hands up meeting where everybody has their hands like this so nobody can be on their devices. Standing meetings where everyone stands around the boardroom table so you can't be hiding things that you're doing under the table, because the technology has infringed on the ability of meetings to be spaces where people communicate actual information and have collaborative dialogue. Okay. And this could just be curmudgeonly old people stuff. And again, this was when she was writing this, you're talking about probably middle to young boomers kind of reflecting on their millennial and Gen Z kind of employees. But yeah, one of the things that employers that she talked to complained about was that their employees were increasingly socially inept. They didn't know how to deal with people, right? They were not good at navigating social situations, despite the fact that they're all very bright. Like these are, law firms and engineering firms that hire out of places like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, MIT, all the best schools, maybe even Duke, who knows, if they're slumming, maybe. But that the employees, struggled with conversations. They fled from conversations. They wanted to do everything online. And employers were like, no, we have to teach you how to do this. We have to teach you how to build a relationship with clients, right? Because when something goes wrong, you need to be able to patch things up with a client, or that client might bolt, right? That client might go to another law firm, and that these things ultimately can cost companies a lot of money. And so, yeah, on that, in kind of business, she thinks people need to, put away the devices and learn how to collaborate again. Okay. I think I'm almost done. Yes, I'm almost done. Okay. Okay, the last one is kind of the public sphere, right? Kind of social, in a sense, social activism that she kind of is complaining about. Now, all of this happened before, George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. And so, things may be a little bit different now. I'll just present you. Sorry, this graphic made me laugh just now. Activism requires action. Twitter activism just requires twits. Yeah, that's probably right. Okay, but basically one of the things she suggests is that a lot of online activism, and she gives this example of a campaign from 2012 called Kony 2012, where basically it was meant to raise awareness about, the leader of a kind of rebel group that recruited child soldiers in Africa, that it's really easy to drum up kind of attention online and get people really excited about something. But actual concrete kind of change and action has been considerably more difficult to make happen online, right? Basically, online, you're not asked for a whole lot when you do something you kind of online. Some people refer to this now as, what do they call it? It is, I'm blanking on the term, not clout chasing, although that could be it too, virtue signaling, right? A lot of the activism online amounts to little more than virtue signaling, right? It's you, during Black Lives Matter, changing your avatar on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram to a black square, or putting the Black Lives Matter banner, or companies putting a rainbow or a pride logo on for the month of June. But it's not very demanding, right? And as a result, very little happens, right? You get kind of pops in kind of social awareness, but very little actual social change. And she puts this down essentially to the kinds of connections that people have online. What she says is that basically online tends to cultivate what she calls weak ties, right? So weak ties are, friends, casual acquaintances, people that you're loosely connected to in a social sense. Strong ties, right, are people trust, and essentially people that have your back and that have your back. So what she suggests is, a lot of online social movements have tended to, function through weak ties, right? Basically, you kind of move in the kind of general social direction, but mostly you don't do much because not much is actually being asked of you and not much is being demanded. At the outside, you might attend like a rally or a march, but most people never even get to that point. That said, she says weak ties can be really powerful, right? If you're not asking too much. So the example she gives is the famous Ice Bucket Challenge, right? This campaign to raise money for ALS research, where basically it was like people would record themselves dumping a bucket of ice water over their heads, and then basically post it on social media and ask their friends to do the same and to make a donation to ALS. And it raised, millions of, over $100 million for the ALS Foundation. But it didn't require you to do much. It didn't require kind of direct action. What she suggests, though, is that real social change, the kind that you saw, say, in the civil rights movement or the LGBTQ kind of campaigns that have gone on, require what's called strong ties, right? That basically, you know the people, you've planned things, and it takes time and discipline. And she gives the example of and I've got the picture here of this, the Woolworths lunch counter sit-ins. Basically, this is from the American Civil Rights Movement. Woolworths is a series of, or was, I don't know if it still exists, a series of pharmacies and they in the South. And they had these lunch counters, right? Where basically you could go and order a sandwich or a hamburger. They were famously white only, right? Black people were not allowed to actually go to the counter. They could go to a window at the back and order their food and take it to go, but they weren't allowed to sit down. So one of the ways that basically African Americans at the time protested segregation was to just go and sit down and kind of take up space and wait basically until they called the police and had them arrested. One of the more humorous anecdotes is that I can't remember the name of the person involved. Is these black gentlemen sat down at the counter, and the owner of the pharmacy came over and said, we don't serve any N-words here. To which they replied, "That's great. I don't want any of that. I just want a cheeseburger." And so, they got arrested, they got thrown in prison, and then bailed out and legally defended by people that had already planned all of this, right? And the Woolworths lunch counter protests were planned for months, right, in advance. The same thing with Rosa Parks, the very famous, account of her not wanting to move to the back of the bus because she was tired. The story is a little bit apocryphal because it was actually planned. Like, they selected Rosa Parks. They scoured the ranks of who they thought would be the most sympathetic person, who would, not move, and then get themselves arrested. These kinds of direct action took planning. And then, she had to go to jail. She had to be bailed out. She had to be defended in a court case and then file a lawsuit, right, to get these kinds of policies overturned. So these sorts of things actually take a lot of work, and you could pull an equal number of these kinds of examples from the LGBTQ rights movement or any kind of successful, well, anyway, you could pull them from a lot of, the women's suffrage movement had a lot of these same things, but these kinds of actual direct actions take a lot of time, effort, and planning. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, and I think that's where we will leave off the course, right? This is a book is a form of social criticism, a lot like iGen, a lot like Postman's The Disappearance of Childhood. All of these people, I think, are kind of share the link that they're concerned that we're not so much using technology anymore, but technology is sort of reshaping us without us being in control. Now, Turkle has her own kind of idea of how to do this, reclaiming conversation, and you can buy that or not. I think the social commentary is worth more in this book than ultimately than the prescription, right? She thinks you should do about it. But I think it's interesting to see where she's kind of picked out where people are finding problems in these technologies and how it's affecting kind of the health and relationships of people in society. Okay, I had a video here, but I won't play it. If I needed to kill a couple minutes at the end of a course, I would. Okay, so very quickly, we'll shift to, and we should be out of here in no time. And then if you want to see your exam, do come talk to me. Won't leave until everyone's gone. I don't know, if for whatever reason you're interested in taking more classes with me, this is the panoply of what I'm teaching in the next year, basically, that I know about so far. I guess Sociology of Youth, you probably don't want to take the class again, so you can ignore that one. I'm teaching one in the summer that's online and async, so if you want to get some credits out of the way, called Catholicism in Pop Culture. It's all just about looking at representations of the Catholic Church in pop culture. It's not sociology, it's CHRTC. So it's offered through St. Joe's College. And then Sociology of Religion in the fall, Intro to Methods. You should probably take that with me because I'm much more fun about it than some of the other people who teach it. Actually, I don't know, Phil Badawi is teaching it. I don't know how he is. He's probably good. He seems like a really nice guy. And then I'm teaching one online and async in the fall, which I'm recording as we speak, which is Sociology of Youth and Religion. Again, not through sociology, but through St. Joe's. Should be really interesting. I've taught it before, and I'm now kind of adapting it for online asynchronous. If you were interested in the religion stuff, you might find that one interesting. And then, yeah, the rest is all kind of the same. And if you're thinking ahead to next spring, I'm teaching the class that I taught again this year, probably, which is like a social religion class with a slight focus on Christianity. But that's way in the future. For now, the course is over in terms of content. Okay, let me pull up my next thing here.